Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Haystack. Today, actually going over the timelines, and specifically, I was going to go over the Egyptian dynasties um, because there are a couple different views of the date of the Exodus, the date of Joseph and Abraham, and all of that. And um, so, I'll show a brief general idea of what that look like. Um, so generally, it's traditionally looked at this way, right? Where you have Abraham from the year for 2,000 years after Adam, and that would be about what 4,000 BC for us. So 4,000 BC, and it kind of overlaps, and there's so many disagreeing timelines that it gets all skewed. So I've been researching and learning a lot about how the dates and everything could have influenced one another. Because there's a couple things that simply just conflict with our traditional idea. So, in early Bibles, like back in the 1800s, they'd actually have a timeline written in the beginning of the Bible. Um, the Book of Mormon, we used to have approximate about, you know, dates, but the later editions don't include the approximate dates anymore. But essentially, look, we have here Egypt, and Egypt has had many capitals down here in Thebes, up here in Memphis, and then you have this is the land of Goshen. This is where the Israelites were settled. Down here, this is where the Valley of the Kings are, where everyone's kind of buried. Oops. So we have capitals that go back and forth, and sometimes you have co-regents. So one will rule the northern half, which is called Lower Egypt, and then another will uh, do Upper Egypt, which is actually south. So I know it goes, it's kind of goofy, but we see the same thing in the Book of Mormon, and I'm sure you've heard me say that before. Um, in fact, we even see that happen in Jerusalem. They end up having the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, and that gets split north and south. And the really cool thing is, with the last days, we're expecting uh, a prophet raised up from the north and a prophet raised up from the south, and that are to uh, be witnesses and have sealing powers on earth and in heaven, and then be killed and risen up again. So I've covered that in a previous video to a moderate extent, but I could always go further into it if you'd like. So here, look at the dates here. So we know that Ramesses in the Bible is listed. Um, it's also a city out there at Tennis, I think, that is listed near Ramesses. And this is where they say that everything happened in the Exodus. So this is what we have, and they claim that everything happened through the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea. Um, but then they also had to carry Joseph's bones. Um, so there is something to say about that to remember that later. But look at this date 12,000 BC. Egypt rules all this northern portion and the southern Nubian portion. Not only that, it butts up against the Hittite Empire, right? Which means it controls the land of Canaan, which is right here. So um, the dates we traditionally have is back here for Exodus, somewhere around here. And that would mean that Egypt kind of still runs the empire. So that doesn't make too much sense, does it? But that also doesn't line up with Ramesses as the pharaoh. So I'm going to actually show you what I've put together. So I put together the dynasties, the pharaohs, and it's over here when it gets interesting. So here we have alternative dates for everything, with which completely changes tradition, but there's an explanation for it. So here, let's look at the 1604 BC. This would be Abraham going through Canaan, right? Leaving Ur and going to Canaan. He comes into Egypt a little bit later, but it would be during the rule of these kings here. Now, 14, 15, 16, 17 dynasty, a lot of the history there is just deteriorated. It's torn to shreds, chipped out. Not everything is recorded as well as it once was. This period of time is actually taken up by the Hyksos groups. The Hyksos are a Canaanite migratory group which were efficient in trade. So they would have they have lots of customs and things that came up from Ur. So essentially, the story we have of Abraham is very, very similar to the background of the Hyksos people. Like this was, there's just lots of groups. In fact, some of the Hyksos people could have been breakoffs from Abraham's family, you know. But they're Shemitic. They also have some of the Japheth mixture in there. Japheth would have been these northern areas. Then you have Shemitic, which is here central and then eastward, and then Hamitic. So those are three sons of Noah. So here, Ham comes down, establishes, a kingdom down here. We have the Shemitic group. They actually stayed. They didn't spread out as much. And Japheth going further up north and going around and inhabiting parts of Europe. So these migratory groups, they're Canaanites. They're also known as the Shepherd Kings. Very efficient as shepherds. And so coming through here and trade, they just go back and forth. And there's a history of the same people kind of migrating into territories and then just breeding themselves into it and into power. And that's essentially what we end up seeing in Egypt. So this is known as the Hyksos period. Now the Hyksos, by the rest of the Nubian Egyptians, so the Egyptians were typically African, and you could see this huge development of great art and architecture and records, and a lot of symbology of things that they would have taken from Noah, like priesthood, ordnance stuff. But then the Canaanites, what they introduce is worship of Baal and other kings or gods. They didn't exclusively do that, but is mainly those gods. And you'd see Baal holding it like a club, So they're a mix of both up in modern day Iraq and then today's Egypt. However, they kept adapting more and more to the Egyptian lifestyle and adopting their gods. So we see Abraham come through, looking. Actually, I'm not going to get into that. I'll continue forward. But they did not keep records as well as the previous dynasty or the dynasties after. In fact, they're hated so much, they're kind of pushed out and seen as kind of unruly, dirty, just kind of do whatever they want. But this is likely why Abraham had such a good connection with the Pharaoh, is because the pharaohs end up being a Shemitic pharaoh and Hyksos pharaohs. So Abraham he comes in like a wealthy sheik into Egypt, you know, communicates and talks to them about the stars and the heavens and everything, things that really get them excited, and that stuff is things that are happening in the temple. Now the religion back then is just amazing. It actually makes more sense than what we typically find out in movies. Um, and if you've gone through the temple, it'll look extremely familiar to you. Um, if you are a Freemason, it'll look familiar to you as well. Um, the early gods that they had a moon back in the day. So I actually have here. Let's see. So the Egyptian gods, they have like the mother goddess Gaia, which is existence, space. Then Amet, which is basically these guys get all kind of combobulated together, that known as like the creator god. Um, so let's see. Amun is like the origin. It was changed to Ra and then Amun Ra. Um, the way that they use their vowels and consonants are very similar to what you end up seeing in ancient Hebrew as well. The Atum Aten or On. Uh, this is all talking about the sun disk god. That's Ra. Um, Atum or Amun is basically the creator, the creator of worlds, and symbolized as the sun. And later on, it kind of got mixed in. Atum, I think, is the what ends up becoming God at noonday. It's let me see, where did I look that particular part up at? All right, so in the Old Kingdom is pre, yeah. So you had Old Kingdom way back here, and then Intermediate, which came up through here, and then you had the Middle Kingdom. So Intermediate is about right here. This is where most history is lost and most of the past is destroyed, and then everything is remade during this time. Um, but where is it? All right. In the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians believed that the Atum lifted the dead king's soul from his pyramid to the starry heavens, and was also the solar deity associated with the primary sun god Ra. Atum was linked specifically with the evening sun, while Ra, or the closely linked god um, Khafre, uh, were connected with the sun at morning and midday. Okay, so basically, it's a time thing in recognition. Um, we know that later the oh, let's read this. Okay, Amun was a major ancient Egyptian deity who appears as a member of the Hermopolitan Ogd. Ogdod. Amun was attested from the Old Kingdom together with his wife Amunet, with the 11th dynasty Amun rose to. Okay, so that's actually important because Hermopolitan is what's called Hermopolis or Heliopolis. So Heliopolis, whoa, I think is right down here. That is where the old Temple of On is. On, which Amun, it's the same thing, but it's the Temple of On. That's referred to in Genesis with Joseph. Um, Potiphar is the high priest there, and Joseph marries the daughter of the high priest. Cool thing is that back then, oh man, back then the priests, they were also like everyone had some form of priesthood back then. So you had high priests. Um, these guys generally held authoritative positions, were heads of state type people. Um, like Potiphar was captain of Pharaoh's royal guard or Pharaoh's guard, most likely because that would have been up here as the front line of defense against migrating groups. So you're going to want the captain of the guard to live where you're most likely to have most of your campaigns. And so these Hyksos groups traveling through, was it the Amorite? Who, so they might be the Amorites, um, who Joseph's brothers sold them to, and the Amorites come back and sell it to Potiphar. So it would make sense that Potiphar and Potipharah may be the same person, takes on a different name depending on what role he's serving, and they actually serve their roles in clergy for a period of time and then they go back. But most of the priestly positions are like mid-level bureaucrats, or even lower city workers. Those are the more servants, the baker, the servant of Pharaoh's cup. Those may have actually been full time, but the lower level ones are more of your kind of public servant workers. So what we see is Abraham come through. He obviously learns Egyptian, gets on really great with the Egyptians, especially talking about stars and temple stuff, because that's something that they can relate to. They see him as a great wise sheik, right? So later on, you end up having. Is this the right one? Yes. Okay. So where does Joseph come in? Well, it's been proposed that he was born in 17,000 BC, which would have been right back here. And then the Hyksos people would have happened after his birth. But this timeline, we're going to go over him actually being about 1430 BC. So this would be happening around the 18th dynasty. What you have is this whole line of pharaohs, and there's lots of really interesting stuff. And if you have time, please go look up all that stuff. But what you end up having is Amenhotep IV, which is Akhenaten, who became the one who introduced monotheism into Egypt. He's the one who looks a little bit dainty, kind of feminine stuff. He may have had some type of disease which made fat grow in a particular feminine style on his body, but still Shemitic, right? So it's very easy to see someone who is in this type of position be, accept Joseph and want an interpretation of dreams, and want to actually do something well. And he's bothered by many things, I'm sure, but he was very much hated. So a lot of people say that he is that Akhenaten is actually the pharaoh who needed the dream interpreted. I don't know about that, but I do think it's in this particular time frame. Freud was the first to propose that Akhenaten may have been Moses himself. Now, I don't believe that, and I think people are kind of wandering further away from that theory. But yeah, Nefertiti was the wife of Akhenaten. They intermarry quite a bit. It's kind of disturbing there, but you get the daughter of Akhenaten is an Akhenamun, who marries Tutankhamun, that boy king, the one that has all this stuff, all this stuff in his tomb, and that was put together really quickly. If you want a review of that, check out Watcher Palmer yesterday, January 23rd. He did a video talking about Tutankhamun, and he did a great job presenting everything about that. These obviously are the channels I recommend. Obviously, most of you are from Christian Homestead, but you can't help but love Brother Palmer, and all these people are great. So please check that out. Back to here. This is the end of the Hyksos period. So what we know with Joseph is that he rode out on a chariot to meet his father. Lots of people say it couldn't have been these earlier dates because chariots weren't being used. Chariots were actually introduced by the Hyksos groups, along with tons of gold and honey and fat and all this stuff, all the things that made Egypt rich. Obviously, there's things before, but even more after this period. They had new technology, more trade coming through from other civilized groups. So the Nubians kind of come back into power. They push out the Hyksos people. Israelites are associated to the Hyksos and are kind of just seen as, hey, they took our jobs, like, get them out of here. And so you have two kings pass away until you have a pharaoh who does not recognize or know who Joseph was. I might actually say that might be Tutankhamun as a young man, wouldn't really know too much of the previous generations. But it could be that time when they forget about Joseph and the Israelites. The weird thing is that it's been proposed that Pharaoh I or Ea is Joseph. So he ran for a short period of time. He was considered an outsider. Where was it? His name means Father God. He was a minister to Akhenaten. I was considered an outsider. He was a commoner. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, Exodus 13:19. His mummy has never been found, only his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, which is significantly south of Goshen. So Goshen, Valley of the Kings in Thebes, down here. Goshen, up in this greener area. Now there's something else. Yes. Okay. Let's see. So this is an image taken from Ea's tomb. Basically, the tomb was actually destroyed. There's no bones found inside it. It's been reconstructed, put back together. This is a lot of the writing that's on the walls. And as you can see, the faces are chipped out. Now, why are they chipped out? Because in the tombs, what they did... Let me check how much time I have. Jiminy Cricket. Just getting into it. All right. I can only go for 30 minutes on this. But so these are essentially what we would see in the endowment. Basically, a sacred embrace going on. Let's see. So you have the 12 that sit in judgment. You have the heart being weighed against the feather. In the Book of the Dead, you must answer like, I've never done this, I've never done that, never done this, never done that. You know, basically, they make it more to be a neutral life. And where was it? Oh, here it is again. Yeah, here's the feather and the heart being weighed. Then you have an escort going with the person who died. Up here, you have the 12 who stand in judgment. The scepters that they hold are priesthood, means priesthood. Here you have Thoth, which is actually like Enoch. He's making a record of all things, recording all things. So if you've read any of the Book of Enoch or any of those things, you see that the Nephilim ask Enoch to be the go between them and God, and speak for them and all that stuff. Well, they've continued on these traditions. And here you have God going out to part the veil. So very, very interesting, right? So the person that died. Then you have the destroyer. So you get to move on. If not, the destroyer tears you to pieces. So that's interesting. Even the way that they construct the temple or the pyramid. So no body has ever been found. They say that there's a king's chamber, which looks like, a granite sarcophagus, or not sarcophagus, but a tomb. But no body's ever been found. Now, could they be resurrected? Maybe. I don't know. Or nothing was in there. It's all symbolic. But the thing is that they constructed this to be enclosed forever. And the way you see this is in every tomb, in every mound, in every axis mundi, you have the tomb the person is buried underneath. So what happens is they seal the tomb. You have 3 stone walls that come down, then 3 blocks that come down and seal off the queen's chamber. Boom, boom, boom. And that clears off everything else. You have that well shaft. The entrance was actually there, and then it was walled up. And essentially, they go through the endowments in their temple rites. So a lot of people say, gosh, let me see how much time I have. A lot of people will say Joseph Smith, copied the temple endowment from Freemasons, but I mean, the Freemasons got it from here. And if you look at it, it wasn't until 1800 or so when we had the interpretation of hieroglyphics, right? So, and it's early on in 1835 when Joseph Smith actually gets hieroglyphic, gets an interpretation. And gosh, I'm running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up another video. All right. Please stick around and check out the next video. Thanks, guys.